Hi, welcome class. It's my first time trying this, so take it easy on the criticism. They will improve. Anyway, um, so this is chapter 24, Ireland and the European Union. And you can get this from my website, mrmcgarry.weebly.com, under LC Resources. You'll see it there under CH24EXP. Okay, so Ireland, the European Union. Well, at the moment, bang up to date, as you know, we have the virus, and at the moment, people are giving out that the EU haven't been working properly together to try and help certain countries like Italy, where the pandemic hit particularly bad heights compared to other countries. So a lot of people criticising that the European Union should have one single strategy to deal with it, and that all countries should follow. And now people are worried that it might break apart, because as this virus kicks in, people are thinking more on an individual basis and looking after their own citizens, etc., etc. So the EU is basically a group of countries that are joined together. Ireland was a member very early on, and we hold quite a bit of sway in Europe as a result. We've had presidencies over the year. And what the European Union does is it's a basic collection of countries that work together for common trade, to make businesses and doing trade between each country a lot easier, so there's a lot less red tape. Some laws overlap. Obviously, if you were working on your own for things like climate change, you wouldn't be able to solve that problem on your own. So the idea behind unions, whether it be the EU or say NATO or the United Nations, is for countries to join together with a common purpose and work towards things that they can help each other with, such as climate change. If we have a common plan for climate change and we have certain targets set by the European Union that we all have to reach, and then we get fined if we don't reach them, obviously that works well for a type of situation where you have more than just one country working on its own. So from that perspective, the European Union is good. I suppose the downside is people don't always work together, and people often have their own interests at heart. And some people argue that because Germany is maybe the biggest power in Europe with the biggest population and arguably the biggest economy, some people argue that countries like Germany and France perhaps have too much power. But anyway, so you're often asked a question Leaving Cert to evaluate the European Union, so it's good to give your opinions on it. Anyway, so Ireland and the European Union, and it's from the Business Express slideshows. Okay, so first off, they show you a company called Kingspan. And Kingspan is a great Irish company, and just to know, it's a PLC, so it's a public limited company, which means it does a lot of business around Europe and around the world, and has its base in Ireland. And it's a building materials company, so it's involved a lot in building materials. Okay, so what's the European Union? So the European Union is an international trading bloc and political alliance of European nations designed to promote closer political, economic, and social cooperation among its members. So politically, the ministers will meet up. Say, for example, the finance ministers might meet up from each EU country, and they might decide ways to tackle banking, for example. And then economically, they might meet up together again. It might be the finance ministers, because that'll be their speciality. Depending on what minister, it might be the Minister for the Environment. They might meet up and decide on plans for the environment. Socially, ministers will meet up. Sometimes the Taoiseachs, in other words, the leaders, and not always called Taoiseachs, so the leaders of each individual European country will join together and decide what way to go forward for the European Union. Okay, so each member country contributes tax revenue towards the cost to run the EU, and in return shares economic and political policies intended to benefit all its members. Okay, so each country gives tax. We have to give tax towards Europe, goes into a fund of Europe. Of course, you have accountants in Europe, you have finance people in Europe, you have loads of people working for the EU. You have different parliaments, and you have different councils, and you have different bodies within the EU, and they all cost a lot of money to run. In return, we get you know, ideas from different EU countries. We get some economic benefits. For example, sometimes they'll give us funding for building new roads, etc., etc. Okay, so if you have any questions, make sure you email them to john.mcgarry@stjosephsrush.com. Also, I'll be putting this into an Edpuzzle. So what I'll try to do is, after a number of slides, I'll put a question in and see if you can answer it, and then you respond, and it'll be up on a file down on Edpuzzle on who completed what and how much of the video you watched and how many questions you answered, and all that's kept then on file within Edpuzzle. Okay, so chapter 24, Ireland and the European Union. So how are EU policies and laws made? So it starts with the EU Commission, which is like a civil service. You know, in Ireland, we've got a civil service, which is basically the people who run the country administratively. So they're people who work in offices around Dublin and Ireland, working for the Department of Education, Finance, etc., etc. But you also have one in Europe to look after the administrative side of Europe. Okay, then you've got the Council of Europe, and that represents national governments, and has even more power again. And the EU Parliament then represents UE citizens. So you get a lot of people elected to Parliament, so they're called the MEPs. You'll see them up in posters in Ireland. So we send a certain amount of MEPs, or members of the European Parliament, to this EU Parliament, and they'll speak on our behalf. Yeah. Okay. How are new EU laws introduced? Well, first of all, the EU Commission proposes a new law. So, say, for example, we're going to bring in a new law to increase or reduce carbon emissions by 10% instead of the current 7%. So that could be proposed as a new law by anyone. It could be any country. And then the EU Commission consults with the EU Parliament and interest groups. So it'll talk then with the people in the EU Parliament, which is the MEPs, the members of the European Parliament. And interest groups just means big organizations like farmers groups or climate activist groups, etc. Yeah, number 3 then, EU Commission redrafts proposed new law. So what that means is they redo it. So it'll start with the Commission, then they'll discuss with Parliament, and then the EU Commission will redo it. So they'll have a look at it again and maybe edit a few bits and then put it into maybe better language and maybe a few extra points or take away some points, and then they propose a new law. If they're happy then, both sides are happy there, what will happen then is it'll go to the EU Council, which is an even more powerful organization, and the EU Council then can approve a new law. Okay, so after that then, the EU Commission and national governments implement those laws within Europe, and then within the national just means the Irish government is the Irish national government, the French national government. So within national governments, then they'll have to also implement them in the individual countries. Okay, so that's an example of, in your book, a case study about motor Harley Davidson cycles. And yeah, it's good to read the case studies. They're not your priority. Your priority, as I was saying, on Schoology is to concentrate on units 2, 3, and 4 of your exam papers, because they're the units that are going to come up in the Leaving Cert exam. And of course, any case study and any business documentary or news item that you read is adding to your overall knowledge of business, and you need to be able to express opinions in business. So the more you know about business, the better your exam is going to go to. Okay, so you can read that case study in the book on Harley Davidson. So what is the role of special interest groups in the EU decision-making body? So we said special interest groups are people like, say, the Farmers Association, maybe climate activists, maybe those type of groups will go into ministers and commissioners and members of the European Parliament and try and lobby. And that means they'll talk to them and they'll negotiate with them and they'll try and get something better, say for the climate activists, something better for the farmers, for the Irish Farmers Association, for example, or and then setting up offices in Brussels and Strasbourg. So what they do is a lot of those interest groups set up special offices. So the climate activist group might have an office in Brussels, so they can have people knocking on the door of the ministers and the commissioners and MEPs constantly to try and get their way. These interest groups also use PR, that's public relations. In other words, they'll get into newspapers and the social media to try and push favor for their particular ideas and laws they might want to try and get these people to introduce for them. They also organize protests and public demonstrations, again, to try and highlight issues and then get the likes of commissioners, ministers, and members of the European Parliament to negotiate, talk about them, maybe bring in things that are going to help the different interest groups. Okay, so next slide. So what are the main EU policies? You've got a single European market, which means sometimes that's shortened down to SEM, and that can be an abbreviation in one of your questions, short questions in exam. But it means that you have a single market, which means you can trade and do business a lot easier with, say, Germany than you could do with, say, China, because China aren't part of the European Union. So in other words, if you were exporting to China, there'd be loads of red tape, loads of documentation, loads of issues with importing, exporting, changing laws, etc., which makes business a lot more difficult. Different language, of course, as well. In Europe, there's a lot, all that red tape is broken down, and what they want to do is encourage different countries within Europe to trade and do business very easily with each other. So we can buy and sell stuff from the EU with ease. Okay, so the European Monetary Union. So to facilitate that, what they did was they brought in a thing called the euro, which is our currency. So obviously, if you've got the same currency in the past, you had the franc, for example, in France, and you had the Deutschmark in Germany, so they're all different currencies. So that made it complicated. You had to work out the maths on it, see the exchange rates, see how much money you were winning or losing after exporting or importing. Now it's a lot easier. You have the euro, so everyone can see the prices clearly, and buying, selling becomes a lot easier for everyone. So it's part of this whole EU idea, yeah? Social policy. So social policy means how do we make Europe a better place for its citizens? How do you make the standard of living better for everyone? Okay. The common agricultural policy. Well, how do we maximize and get the best out of our farmers so that we're all working together and we're not all producing the exact same thing? There's no point all the farmers, say in the whole of Europe, all doing dairy, for example, and then you have no agricultural vegetables and what have you. So what they'll do is they'll say, right, you're a good country for producing that, you should focus on that, this country should focus on that. In other words, they try and play to each other's strengths and so that they can sell and buy from each other again. The environmental policy, as I was saying, it's currently at 7%. The carbon emissions, they want the idea is that to keep emissions below 7%, and currently the Green Party are talking about getting into a coalition government with Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, and they're looking for targets to be set for CO2 emissions. In other words, emissions from fossil fuels, coal, oil, etc. Okay, so structural policies then. So in other words, Europe has often helped us with building roads and bridges and different business types, billing types and ICT plants, etc., to be able to make jobs, make money, and modernize Ireland. And not just Ireland, but they'll invest in new entrants into the EU as well and try and build them up structurally as well. And then competition policies. So they also bring in anti-competitive laws within Europe to make it possible to compete. So, for example, Lidl was allowed to come into Ireland, even though it's a German store, and their own Irish stores would be Super Value and Dunnes stores. But now we're part of Europe, it allows stores such as Lidl, a German store, to come in and compete directly with the Irish supermarkets. And of course, the same for Irish shops and retailers who want to sell in Europe. They're allowed to do that. And the big advantage to Ireland there is we're only a small population of about 3.7 million, including Northern Ireland, maybe around 5 million. So that's not a lot of customers if you're a big company like Garry Group or Kingspan. So they'll want to expand and they'll want to buy and sell products across Europe, because Europe would have a population of maybe around 400 or 500 million. So you can see how many customers you could have as a company and how cool that would be for you if you were a PLC wanting to buy and sell products abroad. Yeah. Okay, so competition policies will be there to try and allow healthy competition between companies within the EU. Okay, so what are the benefits of EU membership to Ireland? Well, one of the benefits is we've had access to a large and wealthy market, as I spoke of, about 500 people in Europe. Less bureaucracy, which means less red tape. In other words, easier to import and export. Membership of the Eurozone, access to business and agriculture grants. Yeah, we often get grants for agriculture. In fact, some of our farmers get grants for growing trees on their land to help with climate change as well. Yeah. But there'll be all sorts of grants for businesses, and to our maybe Enterprise Ireland will get some grants to set up certain businesses that they think will be good going into the future. Of course, there's talk of the economy changing completely into a more sustainable economy after the new government gets in place in Ireland. Some people believe that the current economic model is more medium term and maybe isn't set up in a way that would be good for long term. For example, a lot of companies rely on oil and fossil fuels, which are finite. In other words, they'll run out eventually. And also the impact of farming on nature and soils, and people think that's not going to be able to just continue. So what they're talking about now is a new economic model, more renewable energy, more care for the environment, more quality of life for people. It's not just people rushing around in very busy jobs and not having enough time for a better quality of life. Okay, so I'm on the point there for employees. So for employees, jobs in exporting firms include transnational companies who set up European operations in Ireland. So the benefit of being in the EU for Ireland is we've the likes of Google and Microsoft and Intel and loads of different big multinational companies, or you can call them global companies, transnational companies, and they set up some of their headquarters in Ireland because we're a key member of the EU, because we speak English, because of our educated workforce, because of our low 12.5% tax rate, but also, again, because we're part of the European Union. And obviously that makes it easier for those businesses then to do businesses within the European Union. Okay, so for consumers, the use of a common currency, increased consumer choice, and strong consumer legislation. And so what they're saying there is the EU membership to Ireland is good for consumers, in other words, you and I that go and buy stuff, because we get to use the same currency. Say we're going online and buying stuff from Poland, we can see exactly what price it is and buy it easily. Increased consumer choice, we get to have loads of different choice. We can buy from any country in Europe online. And we get an awful lot more products coming in, because obviously if it was only Ireland, we wouldn't be able to get a lot of the brand names that are made in different parts of Europe. We'd only have Irish brands if we weren't open to allowing imports in. And that'll be known, by the way, as a protectionist economy. And China went through that for a long time, where they just didn't allow many exports at all. They were very strict on what they allowed into their country. They're still quite strict, but at one point they were very strict. So a lot of the things that they consumed were built and made by Chinese people. So it depends what economic model you go after. Okay, so for the economy, investment in infrastructure. Again, when you think of infrastructure, think of buildings, think of bridges, think of roads, the things that are set up to facilitate business doing their stuff. So investment in infrastructure, more responsible economic policies. So the benefits of EU membership is more responsible economic policies. In other words, in Ireland for a long time, we just used to spend. Some would argue that we still do that, but now we have Europe looking over our shoulder and saying, well, hold on a minute, you're letting house prices get out of control, you're spending too much, you're not taking enough tax on the fossil fuel industries, blah, blah, blah. So that's been good for the country, in that it keeps an eye on what our politicians are doing and helps bring them in line for what's better for Europe and the world, arguably. Again, everything can be argued in life, same with this. So stronger environmental protection. So That's true. You couldn't do that on your own. You need people to be working together globally, never mind even just in the European Union. So that's where the United Nations will come in as well, because that's countries working together, united around the world. Not every single country, but most countries of the world. Okay, so Microsoft, I've given you a case study and a documentary on Microsoft. It's up online and it's also up on Schoology. So obviously an important company, good to know about it. Do you need to know about every global company? No. I was saying maybe focus on a few. So Amazon being the biggest in the world would be an important company to know about. Google, given its big operations in Ireland, or you could use Microsoft, very big companies and important companies for Ireland. I think it's good to know about one or two of them. And then you need to pick an Irish owned and run company. And you need to remember Ryanair and Michael O'Leary being one of the best managers for reducing costs on a company and building that company to be one of the best run managed companies probably in the world. Yeah, okay. So what challenges face Ireland and the EU in the future? So there's a few issues that face Ireland, and we need to increase more exports to the European Union. We need to obey EU rules on economic management. So what does that mean? That means we need to obey rules. As we saw, rules are built into the EU, and they pass different phases, and then it becomes a law, and then we have to follow those laws. And we need to increase exports to the EU. That just means obviously we need to sell more. The more we sell from Ireland into other places, the more money our country makes as a whole. So that's obvious. So increased competition from other EU countries for transnational investment. Okay, so the challenges are here are that we're getting a lot more companies coming in from the EU competing against our own companies. So obviously, if our companies aren't up to that, their companies could take over and ours will be at a loss. The other challenges there, yeah, need to obey. So in other words, they're saying it's hard to obey the EU rules. And then they're also saying another challenge is to increase exports to the EU. But it's not easy to export sometimes in terms of you need a lot of money, you need a lot of know-how, etc. Maybe you need to know something about foreign languages as well, depending on where you're exporting in Europe. So there are other challenges facing Ireland. Now, issues facing the entire European Union. So what are the problems that the EU is going to face? Well, trying to protect its euro currency, because some countries take, for example, Britain wanted to take back their own currency and have sterling. Now they're back to sterling. They've done something called Brexit, which means that they've broken away from the European Union, and they're now controlling their currency, controlling their own laws, etc., business, and the whole lot. And negotiating a new deal with Europe to try and get business working for them across Europe as well. Okay, another problem for Europe is tax harmonization. An example there is we have a tax for corporate companies, which I've said many times in class, of 12.5%. A lot of countries give out about that in Central Europe in particular, saying that we shouldn't be given the likes of Google and Microsoft, etc., such a cheap tax rate, given the amount of money they make. Yeah, and we were even known as charging them even less tax, 1% at one stage, just to keep them in Ireland. Okay, and then reform of EU decision-making bodies, and that's another problem facing the European Union, that it's hard to reform the different organizations that make up the EU, like the Parliament, the Council, etc. And you know, disagreements between different countries, different cultures, etc., etc. So that's all problematic. Reform of EU budgets, especially the common agricultural policy. So that's, let me see, reform of EU budgets. Basically, saying that's a problem for Europe, because obviously individual countries like to set their own taxes. They like to reform. They like to make their own national budgets. They don't want interference from anyone else saying this is what you can spend, this is what you shouldn't spend, this is what you should tax, this is what you shouldn't tax. So that causes problems when Europe tries to maybe interfere with budgets, individual budgets, like the Irish national budget. Right. Okay. Moving on. So. Oh yeah, now exam practice, fine. Okay, so that's it. So yeah, so in summary, what you'd want to do, you often get a question on evaluate Ireland's membership of the European Union. So you need to know, for example, what are the pros, what are the cons of being in Europe, and what's your own opinion on it, and where do you think it's going into the future? Is it going to last? Is it a good idea for Ireland? Is it a bad idea for Ireland? Is it a good idea for Europe? Yeah. So again, if you have any questions, email john.mcgarry@stjoestrush.com. And thanks for watching. And hopefully the next one will be an improvement on this one. That's the plan anyway. So, okay. Thanks. Bye-bye.